Scott O'Toole, who's the president of the Family Farm Alliance, and a rancher from the, I think you say from the Savory area. You always say Bags, but I think Savory is officially the P.O. box. Beyond Bags. Beyond Bags.
Yeah, we played in Colorado too.
The Honorable Albert Sommers, who's the owner of Sommers Ranch and also a representative in the Wyoming State Legislature. And Ament, the governance committee member, for the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. So thank you all for being here, and Mr. Neiman, I'll let you begin your remarks.
Okay, thank you, David. Appreciate it. Special thanks to our governor of the great state of Wyoming for putting this together, and also to the Western Governors Association for providing this opportunity. To some of you that don't know our business, I'm a third generation forest products business and a fifth generation in the ranching business. Our sawmill business has operations in Wyoming, South Dakota, and our newest adventure in Colorado. All of our forestry practices in the Black Hills are environmentally certified, and working on that in Colorado. And almost all of our harvest operations occur on federal lands. So my comments here relate mostly to the ESA influences on federal lands. And as you can imagine, when I think about the effects of the threatened and endangered species on forest management, I think immediately of the northern spotted owl, and Ed referred to that in the last panel a little bit. And the loss of over 200 sawmills, which was 200 families, and effect on 200 communities. And there was 40,000 jobs lost due to that in the Pacific Northwest. And the Mexican spotted owl that completely devastated the timber products industry in both Arizona and New Mexico. I'm going to discuss briefly 4 species that had a potential to affect forest management in Wyoming: the grizzly bear, the lynx, the northern long-eared bat, and the black-backed woodpecker. The first grizzly bears have affected forest management on the Shoshone and Bridger Teton through seasonal operation restrictions, road standards, road density restrictions, and requirements for road obliteration, even when those roads were needed again for future entries. Those access restrictions affect forest management and fire suppression also. The second species, the northern long-eared bat, occurs in 37 states, including northeast corner of Wyoming and the Laramie Peak area. On April 2nd of this year, the northern long-eared bat was listed as threatened. The cause of the bat population decline is introduced fungus referred to as the white nose syndrome, which infects the noses and wings of hibernating bats, causing them to wake up and burn off the fat reserves and then starve unto death. To be clear, habitat is not an issue for the northern long-eared bat. Fortunately, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service implemented an interim 4D rule concurrent with the listing decision that allows forest management and timber harvest to continue without prohibition on take outside of the areas where the white nose syndrome is known to occur, including the Black Hills. The 4D rule consists with extensive research conducted in the Black Hills that clearly shows forest management is beneficial to the northern long-eared bat by creating the forest structure they depend on. However, if the white nose syndrome is ever found in the Black Hills, then the Black Hills National Forest would face the same restrictions placed that are already on other places that have the white nose syndrome. Already, the Center for Biological Diversity has sued the Fish and Wildlife Service over the interim 4D rule. Without a practical and useful 4D rule in place, our ability to effectively manage our forest for the long-eared bat habitat and to reduce the risk of catastrophic fires and insect epidemics could be significantly reduced. The third species, and the one of most concern to us, is the Canada lynx. Canada lynx was proposed for listing as threatened in response to a lawsuit in 1998. The state of Wyoming opposed this listing. On March 24th, 2000, the Fish and Wildlife Service listed the Canada lynx as threatened in the contiguous United States, including Wyoming. As the name suggests, the majority of Canada lynx range is in Canada, with most of Wyoming on the very southern periphery of its range. In the listing decision, Fish and Wildlife Service stated that the southern lynx, which includes the the Medicine Bow National Forest, the amount of lynx habitat is relatively limited and does not contribute substantially to the persistence of the contiguous U.S. lynx population. The Fish and Wildlife Service also stated that timber harvest and pre-commercial thinning are not concurrently conducted, nor are they likely to be projected future to be conducted at levels likely to impact the lynx at population level. Since then, despite the ESA requirement to develop a recovery plan, the Fish and Wildlife Service has yet to propose and publish a recovery plan. Therefore, there are no population goals, no habitat goals, no criteria for delisting. In response to this listing decision, the U.S. Forest Service approved a Northern Rockies Lynx Amendment, including the Shoshone and Bridger Teton National Forest in 2007, the Southern Rockies Lynx Amendment, including the Medicine Bow National Forest in 2008. The Lynx Amendments contain standards and guidelines that severely restrict forest management, especially pre-commercial thinning, that is essential for lodgepole pine to grow into healthy, productive stands. According to the final environmental impact statement, an 89% reduction in sawlog-sized trees would be anticipated. Implementation of the Lynx Amendment has been characterized by increased analysis and cost, lynx habitat mapping with no opportunity for public input, a very cumbersome accounting process, much less pre-commercial thinning than even the Forest Service predicted, and arguably very little benefit to lynx populations. The only glimmer of light is that the Forest Service is required to do a Southern Rockies Lynx Amendment direction as part of the upcoming forest plan revisions. Finally, the fourth species, the blackback woodpecker, has been proposed listed as a distinct population segment in the Black Hills. Blackback woodpeckers eat insects in burned trees. In a recent lawsuit over a salvage timber sale in California, the Center of Biological Diversity referred to a burned forest as a complex early cereal forest, described it as an extremely rare, and concluded that therefore the habitat created by fire is of exceptional value. In response to a lawsuit, the Fish and Wildlife Service is required to make a decision about listing the blackback woodpecker in 2017. Based on these experiences, I would like to see a greater state role in listing decisions, delegation of recovery planning and monitoring to the state, allowing the state time to implement conservation measures in order to preclude a listing decision and delisting decisions based on accomplishment of recovery plan goals. With that said, I just reflect on one other comment that was mentioned earlier about the attorneys and attorneys being very prevalent due to ESA. I kind of look at our industry as maybe getting a chance to be listed on endangered species. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I look out in the audience and see a lot of friends and colleagues I've worked on for conservation and production over my whole lifetime. It's humbling to be here in the context of how important this is. The credibility of the Western governors and Governor Lee to take on this issue is as important as anything going on in natural resources in this country right now. I had the opportunity the day before yesterday to meet with David, moderator, representing Governor Lee, Michael Bean from the Fish and Wildlife Service, Jason Wello from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Brian Rutledge, who was one of the architects of the Sage Grouse program here in Wyoming, and a fellow from the same county commission, to talk about the future of the Endangered Species Act. that was really a small kickoff for this effort. But what's important about it in my mind is that a year ago, when the Family Farm Alliance, which I'm president of, decided this was our priority, people said there's no way there will ever be any changes. I didn't believe that then, and I don't believe it now. I think it's the right time for modernizing an act. It was passed in 1973, 92-0 by the Senate, and 390 to 12 by the House. That would not happen today if those legislators understood where we're at today. Legislative intent, I was talking to the Honorable Mr. Sommers a little bit ago. I was a legislator, this was Don Ament, and I was wondering what you are not anymore, you become dishonorable. The discussion in DC was really powerful because it was a lot of people talking about how they perceive the act, but it was also a reach out to say, what are we going to do in the future? And I'll just, I think those of you that know me, I'll tell it like I think it is. And what I think happened is when we agreed with some of the groups, the North Fish and Wildlife Service and Department of Interior agreed on more listings, that became an untenable process. It's not possible to do it within the context of time with the courts. It's not financially capable of being done. And I look at the incredible effort made on the safe routes and see people out here, Tim, and all of you that worked so hard to have a process that could work. So we've embarked upon a process that might work. And it's a model of how we might do things in the future that is dependent really on what happens with the rollout of the agencies. Our family, in my great-grandfather settled right on the state line. So we are in charge of Colorado inland. That means double the forest, double the BLM, double the fish, the whole agency. So we have a lot of regulatory experience. And sometimes they say that the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So when I walk out from our house to the cookhouse for breakfast in the morning, I look and see how many elephants there are. And more often than not, there's a gray thing walking slowly up toward the ranch because there were so many issues. There's so many issues for farmers and ranchers. I've spent 3 years of an 8-year term on the food policy task force that's working on how do we feed. 3 years ago it was 9.2 billion people, now it's almost 10 because we miscounted sub-Saharan Africa. How do we feed that many people in the next 35 years by doubling the food supply? We don't do it by a regulatory process that takes farmers and ranchers out. And Mr. Sommers and I are marching toward that fastest growing category of people in agriculture. So what that is, fastest growing category, 70 and above. Because we're not replacing each other. I am very lucky. I have a son and daughter, that's why I'm here. They're doing the work at home so that I can be here. And we believe it's important that we get involved in this policy. But the reality is, when you look at the big picture, we're not having enough people in agriculture to double the food supply. It doesn't seem logical, but that's the way it's going. And so this attempt by the state of Wyoming to take the Endangered Species Act and all of the states in the West and deal with it in a process that could be successful is huge. And the fact that the governor has embraced this, and all the governors, that's what's so amazing. This is a bipartisan effort by all the governors to be successful. And so the rollout from the ag perspective, from the rancher perspective, is going to be what happens with the BLM office and the Forest Service office, Game and Fish office, and Fish and Wildlife office. What happens in this next period of time? And we're all waiting and hoping that it's okay. And I've had, the good friend of mine who's the head of natural resources in Montana. He said, "Pat, what do you think? How's it going in Wyoming?" I said, "I think it's okay. We're not going to know until it rolls out." He's got to implement it in Montana, and he doesn't know either because we don't know how those offices are going to approach what we think is an agreement. family farm lines is a cautionary tale, and the reason we decided to get into this discussion is because the listing of the Delta smell and the show regions. I'm going to have a conference call tomorrow with family farm lines. We do it once a month. That's up and then one annual meeting. It will be a sad tale because my members in California will tell the story of what it meant to have a listing. And those people that are saying, oh, it's better to have this listed, no way. Because when you understand the power of the federal government when it comes to a listing, it is incredible. And so when the family farm line said, let's get involved in the Endangered Species Act, we had no idea of the power of the Western governors that's about to emerge, and the power of all of you that have the opportunity to weigh in on this. So I appreciate being able to be here, and I will tell you one thing, that Gary and I know each other, we work together on a lot of stuff. There's a part of the Fish and Wildlife Service called Partners. It's a very small part. So we have the refuge people, we have the ecological service people for the listers, we have partners for conservation, partners for Fish and Wildlife, for the people that work with private landowners to not have things listed. I'm going to tell you, Gary, and you'll hear this over and over again, that is the model for what we need to do. Get this stuff on the ground, get it to the people that are in the communities, work together with us, and we will solve the problems. Thank you so much.
Once again, my name is Albert Sommers, and first I want to thank the governor's office for providing this forum and for stepping up to the plate on the ESA issue. I'm really here as the face of, I guess, to provide a face to the challenges of recovering large carnivores on the landscape. As well as being a rancher and Wyoming State Representative, I'm also president of the Upper Green River Cattle Association. We're a group of 10 ranches that run in the Upper Green River Cattle Allotment, which is a 130,000 acre allotment in the Bridger Teton National Forest. It's permitted to run over 7,000 head of cattle, but currently runs close to 6,000 head of cattle. That allotment runs from the upper green area of Sublette County, kind of over the top to the top of Union Pass, basically to where the three oceans split. And so water from the top of that drainage goes down the Wind River, goes down the Snake, goes down to Green. And because it's such a corridor for water, water makes things erode, and water creates landscapes where things can travel. And so we're in the middle of probably a very, very large movement corridor for a lot of species, including grizzlies and bears. So in 1993, our association members found the first bear-killed calf in the life of us younger ones. One of the older gentlemen in our association had seen one when he was a kid, and he's well into his 80s now. And so by 1997, we had a real issue, and to give you a perspective on that issue. And then let me back up a bit. And then in 2000, we had the first wolf-killed calf on our allotment. And then to give you a perspective on what this has caused, the amount of challenges this has caused us, just losses of cattle. So prior to 1994, we averaged about a 2% death loss on calves in the allotment. Well, the last 4 years before 2015, we were in excess of 9% calf loss in that allotment, 9%. Doesn't mean much to many of you that are not in the cattle business, but 2% is tough enough. 9% is off the wall. 2015, this year, was the worst year we've ever had. My ranch, and I don't have the numbers for everybody yet, that's going to be done tomorrow actually while I'll be gone. But my numbers were I lost 13% of my calves this year. 13% of my calves. So what does that look like in terms of confirmed losses? And I have a little chart here that I'm going to read off. And so this is information provided from Scott Talbot's crew at Game and Fish. And so these are confirmed losses. So obviously we have these death losses that occur, and then we have confirmed losses. So do they actually kind of correlate to some degree, at least in the curves? And so if you take a look, and I'm just going to skip past the beginning. The first confirmed one, there was 1995 that the Game and Fish Department has down, but I'm going to go to 2009, and I'm going to start there. So in 2009, we had 15 confirmed grizzly kills, and I'm just going to stick with grizzlies because I have more information on grizzlies than wolves. 2009 or 2010, it went to 20 confirmed, 11 to 33, 12 to 45, 13 dropped to 41, 14 it went to 66, and this year we had 80 confirmed grizzly kills on our allotment. And we also had 10 confirmed wolf kills. Okay, and I'm just talking about the death loss and not the management implications. So the management implications, in the face of that kind of predation, livestock do not want to be there. You can't blame them. They bunch, they're hard to, herd, and I think it's probably true because they do it. You hear that buffalo got in a bunch, and that's kind of how they fought off wolves and bears. In the face of that kind of predation, cattle get in a bunch. But they get in a bunch in the open, it's hard to get them back into areas of grass. It's hard to keep fences upright. It's hard to keep them on the allotment. And so, based upon these numbers, these losses, these trends, and I also let's talk about the bear. Let's talk about the bears, because it's just not about the cows, it's about the bear. So I'm going to give you the numbers for bear relocations and removals in that area. I'll just start with 2009 as well. In 2009, there were 2 bears relocated, 0 bear removals. 2010, there were 6 relocations, 1 removal. 11, 1 relocation, 4 removals. 2012, 5 relocations, 3 removals. 13, 3 relocations, 4 removals. 2014, a year ago, 8 relocations, 2 removals. And in 2015, there were 9 relocations and 6 bear removals. It's estimated, I've heard it estimated, and it's just an estimation, it's a number thrown out there, that there could be 60 grizzlies in the upper grain. And I certainly know that in every place there's cattle, there's grizzly trail. Every place. We have 4 pasture systems. We have 5 rider camps, 6 paid range riders that we use to manage that along. And so we have a fairly intensive system of rotations, which has also created a challenge because it's hard to keep cattle in certain places. Let's see, skip to, yeah, and I guess one thing I want to mention here right off the bat is this seems like a disaster, and it's beginning to become one, but it's also a success story. And I'm going to highlight 3 areas. One is bears and wolves have recovered beyond us and have went down both the Wind River Range, Wyoming Range. And so it's clear that it has been a success story for bears and wolves. It's been a success story for ranchers in the fact that the state of Wyoming recognized that you have to have a compensation program if you want to keep ranchers in business and basically provide damage claims against what is still their species. They still have some control of these species or ownership of these species in statute. So it's a win there in that we as ranchers have, in the face of this depredation, have managed to stay on the landscape, but it has been at the expense of the state of Wyoming, not the federal government. I want to reiterate that, not the federal government, the state of Wyoming. And I think it's also a success story in that we as permittees in the Game and Fish Department and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Forest Service have created better lines of communication around these depredation issues. So I think that's a success story. I'm going to go to broken promises. Governor Meade talked a little bit about it. but he really forgot to start back when the grizzly bear was first put, when the recovery plan was first created. It wasn't 500 animals, all right? I can't remember the exact number, but sure Scott Talbot could, but it was something like 24 females with bears a year at their side, with cubs a year at their side, distributed, and then there was these distribution areas. And so, I can't remember, it was like 2000, I was asked by another governor, I think Governor Geringer, and so maybe it was 99, somewhere. I was asked to sit on a panel to create a conservation strategy, a 3-state conservation strategy. This was a collaborative effort. There was everybody at the table of 3 states sitting in a room developing a conservation strategy for the grizzly bear. By the time that was dry, the ink was dry on that, it was thrown out. Because nobody believed that that would work, and we had to have 500 animals to have a viable population. According to biologists, 500 was a magic number. And so we continue to have these broken promises. That was a contract. That first recovery plan was a contract with the people of America that we were going to recover a species under these conditions, and we were going to move on. And that contract has been broken, and that's not right. And so what I want to also talk about, I want to visit real quickly on what the ESA does not do, and then I want to please wrap up. Okay, so that's always my problem. But I do want to mention just a few opportunities, and this is new to ranchers, and it's hard for us to know how to take it and to accept it as an opportunity. So the Greater Yellowstone Coalition contacts me about 2 years ago and says, how can we help? How can we help with this problem? And so I have a pretty good relationship with that individual. And I think this is important. So I'm going to take some time here. You have to develop relationships with people before you can ever develop any kind of plan or come to any kind of collaboration. And so they approached me, and I went back to my people and I said, you know, the GYC, they're interested in helping, and the rest of the ranchers going, you're what? Not them, you know. And so I think what the opportunity here is, we have to be mindful of the past, and we have to look forward and see where the opportunities are in the future, because they may not be the same as what the problems were in the past. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I'm Don Ament. Maybe I can catch us up a little bit here and become honorable again. I served 12 years in the Colorado General Assembly and then 8 years as the Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture. And the honorable part, I'll never forget that the first time my neighbors on a rural route, I live out in northeastern Colorado, my mailbox was full of stuff the Honorable Don Ament. Those people thought, what in the world is going on with this guy? So I'll start that out with my remarks today. I represent Colorado on a negotiation with Wyoming and Nebraska and the Department of Interior to recover hoopers, plovers, and terns on the central region of the Platte River. Kearney, Nebraska would be a good place for those of you that might wonder where we're working. Back in 1997, the governor of Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado, along with the Secretary of Interior, noted the listing of whooping crane, plover, and tern, as well as a concern about a pellet sturgeon down at the confluence with the Platte and the Missouri River, and said basically you need to be accountable for the impacts you have to these species as they use the Platte, and they use the Platte in a migratory way. So we're a tiny piece of their flyway, but we have the responsibility of doing what we can to recover. So, amusing part of this story, it took us probably about 10 years in pretty difficult negotiations to come up with an agreement that turned into a program. That 10 years of negotiations, interestingly enough, resulted in in the first increment of program of 13 years. So 10 years to negotiate 13 years of program is not a very, excuse me, I'm choking up on that because that really isn't a very efficient use of anyone's time. But the point is, and I'll be blunt about this, I really think the intent of that was to make, to get into the program, was to protect our water users from the snow melt all the way to the end of the state line. And that's not only Colorado, that's Wyoming and Nebraska as well. And for Colorado, we wanted to make sure our water users would have what you might call an umbrella insurance policy to say that every time you were looked at as a water user, you didn't have to justify your impacts by yourself on the species that Grand Island stayed away. And so we pretty much were successful, I believe, in establishing this program where when you divert water out of the river and you have a nexus to a federal program, and we all do because we store most of that water in on federal land or in federal reservoirs, Bureau of Reclamation reservoirs, we have a nexus, and so we have to be accountable for our impacts of diverting water out of a system and being responsible for that. So a Section 7 consultation with EPA, if any of you have ever gone through that, is a very expensive, extensive process that will require you to have certainly a battery of engineers and a battery of lawyers and negotiate your deal so you don't have a one-for-one replacement obligation at the state line. So I suppose now now we are in a program now, we have about 3 years left of the first increment. We have probably streamlined consultants. I won't say that anymore, I'm not getting that done. But we've consulted with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife probably about 140 or 50 times to acquire our impacts on our species at the Central Platte region. So here, what I want everybody in here to understand, the reason agriculture gets so nervous about all of these are those people on the land, and it doesn't matter whether it's agriculture or whether it's forestry or the extractive industries. The number of us in this business continues to shrink. And it's very difficult for us to tell our story to that population that would like to recover species and don't understand the impacts that has on us. So their numbers are getting bigger, our numbers are getting smaller. It's difficult for us to tell our story about how these partnerships should and can work. And consequently, I've always thought in Colorado that we needed to make sure that all of the taxpayers in Colorado, the citizens that want to recover and help us recover these species, are part of the solution. And that comes through, in my view, paying their share of the way on these recovery programs. And so in Colorado, as in Nebraska and Wyoming, a big piece of our program is for Colorado, for instance, $25 million went into the Species Conservation Trust Fund that helps to put this insurance program together for the recovery program. The federal government has partnered up since the Bureau of Reclamation and U.S. Fish are part of Interior. They're both at our governance committee table, and the Bureau of Reclamation is paying at least half the freight on our recovery program. Wyoming is paying their part with the plant finder modification, along with the land in habitat that's been purchased in Nebraska. We now, as a program, own over 10,000 acres of habitat in the Central Platte region to recover these birds. That is a considerable accomplishment. And then the rest of that story is coming up with the water. We need to come up with at least 130,000 acre feet of water at critical times at that habitat. And so now we're in the process of trying to build a re-reg reservoir so we can capture this water that goes to these recovery programs. There's a lot of frustration in that piece of it, the water piece of it. Let me tell you one of the big ones. I have my picture on the front page of the Omaha Herald a few years ago where we're pumping sand into the Platte River, where 10 miles upstream of that, NRCS is working extremely hard telling farmers to put in all kinds of farming practices that don't allow any sedimentation to the river, putting in no-till requirements, doing all these kinds of things that keep the sediment out of the river, and I'm standing down there putting sediment back in the river. That is just not a way to be popular, and it's no wonder I lost my honorable designation. So, to wrap up here, here's what we're doing. We've got 3 states and the Department of Interior working collaboratively in a program to recover whooping cranes, plovers, terns, and make sure we don't harm a pellet sturgeon. Why would we harm a pellet sturgeon? So this program is working well. We have financial contributions from all the states. We have land purchased in the habitat area. We're working on providing the water collectively to that critical area. And so at this point, I'm saying success. We have a long ways to go. First increment took us 10 years, remember, to negotiate that. How we're going to negotiate the second increment remains to be seen. But the fact is that a collaborative program among 3 states to concentrate on a problem in one area is working, and we are helping people that divert water and put it to beneficial use in these 3 states. We're helping those people accomplish their goals. And actually, my closing remark, and doing that so we can feed this nation for less than 7% of their disposable income. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have a few moments before lunch to be able to take a few questions at this point. So if there anybody get a hold of me right there who's got a microphone.
Good morning, Warren Gosell, County Commissioner. First of all, I'd like to thank the governor and all speaker and all the audience for joining us here today. Please feel free to leave all the cash you'd like with the local merchants before you leave. A question for the panel. When is the appropriate time, when should the actual, honest discussion, the actual economic cost of either listing or the implementation of the ESA, when should that occur? And who should author that? And who actually deliberates that decision?
You gotta watch me or I'll answer every question, so somebody just has to be quiet. I think that was one of the things I didn't get a chance to bring up with the ESA fails. I think you need to do an economic analysis at the same time you decide to list. And at that time, you really, before you list, you should start to, you should see these species coming. And I think that's the big thing. You need to see them coming. You need to do the economic analysis. Then you need to figure out strategies to mitigate those losses, those economic losses. And the federal government needs to be a driver in this and not forcing the states and counties and local individuals to bear the burden of this.
In our case, in our recovery program in Colorado, the federal government, through the Bureau of Reclamation, has come up with a $380 million program. They've come up with over half of the cost of that program.
And I mentioned legislative intent, and I guarantee the legislative intent was that was going to be integral in any discussions, about listing. Unfortunately, we're not, and I think hopefully what we're going to come out with this with, and the House of Resources, or the House Representative Resource Committee passed several bills last year that talked about transparency and that early participation of the states and the early participation of those who are going to be affected to deal with exactly what you're asking.
I'm Matt Avery, Cameron County Commissioner, and again, I thank all the panelists for being here today. And my comment is to Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Sommers, and that is, on my ranch, we're 5 generations. My daughter's home right now, running the ranch while I'm here. And granddaughter did a report last year in SSA And that with how much land is being taken out of agriculture per day in the United States. And that's 3,000 acres a day that's being taken out of production in agriculture, which means every bit of land that's left to produce food for the American people to eat is that pressure is building and building and building. And I've said this not once but many, many times, and it seems like it goes over people's heads, but eventually we're going to get down where we don't have enough land to produce food for American people to eat. And when America gets down to where it has to depend upon other countries to feed her, we're in trouble. But what better way to take over control of the country is if you can starve them down. And I don't want to see us in that shape. And Mr. Sommers, I took your figures, 9% loss on 7,000 head is over $750,000 a year loss. And to me, that's devastating. And I don't think the state of Wyoming, I don't think any rancher in this great state or any other state should have to face those kind of loss. And I thank you.
Well, I guess there's so many different ways to respond. I attended a meeting after the Endangered Species meeting in DC of one of the groups going to Paris for the UN discussions. And I will tell you, there's a cavalier discussion about how grazing or irrigated agriculture or other parts of our productive capability are susceptible to not just further regulation, but elimination as we look at carbon and methane and all those different things. And I think, I have done an awful lot of work studying these numbers, and they're not disputed by anybody, the left, the right. And there's a thing I call the Gore-Wolfowitz axis. It means that both the left and the right can find out ways to justify having the third world or another part of the world feed us. That's not good policy. And there's nothing more, and especially when you look at what happened in California with the listing of the smell, there's nothing more devastating to the production of food than the listing that is not done in the way that those farmers and ranchers have the ability to participate in the process.
I guess just to give you, we live in one of those valleys like this valley that has a lot of high mountains and valuable land. Give you an idea, in '96 we had our ranch appraised, and then 4 years later my dad died, so we had to have it appraised again. In that 4-year period, the valuation on that ranch doubled. 2 years later we had another appraisal done on the ranch because my mom was going to get out of the partnership. 2 years time, that had doubled again. And then we went into a conservation easement, I think it was in 2010, and it doubled, the valuation doubled again. And it's not doubling because people want that land for agriculture. It's either they want it to develop or they want it because they want it east of the west. And so the one thing I'm going to say, and it's not for everybody, but I am going to make a pitch on conservation. So I think the one thing ranchers we don't often do is we don't look at the value of all of the resources on our land, the human capital, the livestock capital, the hay capital, and the wildlife capital. And my sister and I, neither one of us had children, and we wanted to retain our ranch in perpetuity, whatever that means, for the opportunity for agriculture and wildlife. And so I think there's tools out there for people to capture some of this, and it doesn't need to be a conservation easement. There needs to be more of this. There needs to be more incentive-based programs, and this is where I make a pitch that I made the other day. If we do not preserve the working landscapes of the West, we will not preserve the wildlife of the West. It goes hand in hand. And so we need to find new incentive programs, and we need to find a way to trust each other, and that's probably the hardest.
I think we do have time for one more question before we break for lunch, if anybody has one. If not, I do. I have several, but I'll only ask one. So my question is actually for Mr. Neiman, and everybody else can feel free to chime in because I think it applies to everybody. But I was curious, based on your remarks, have you had any positive experiences or any experiences that you can share about being able to work collaboratively with the state or the federal government or other partners on working with some of these endangered species issues that you've had to deal with? And if so, what are they? And if not, why do you think that's the case?
I would respond first, probably 0 on the links, or very little cooperation there, but there needs to be something said. Our experience after watching what the spotted owl did to the west, we've had a very strong collaborative process working together as an industry on the northern long-eared bat. So we have had an influence there, and we're a part of have an effect on whether we put the 4D rule into place. The advantage, when you have 30-some states and it hits from Florida to the Northeast, all of a sudden, most of the people that are supporting or filing lawsuits, a lot of times are from the East, filing against what happens here in the West. In this case, all of a sudden, we have a species that is blanketed the majority of the United States, and you have a little different attitude. And we were able collaboratively to at least help get the 4D rule going. But with that said, I still have frustrations even looking at the northern long-eared bat. And I support ways to help the endangered species, but I'm still frustrated at how a single species can be focused on. If you bring the question back of economics, but how can we manage at the expense of the yield of other species? There's got to be a way to broaden our focus here, and that's where a collaborative process could really help, I think. We could bring that into our process better.
David, one thing I'd like to add to the collaborative process, there's a lot of times more than one way to recover and enhance this species. And one thing we're finding out, we're having more success maybe out of the Platte River in adjacent habitats, sand pits and so on, better nesting and so on than we have in the river. And the other thing that we're doing in the river is finding that we can have more success with bulldozers and even diesel fuel than we have waiting for floods and so on to manipulate sandbars and create habitat. And so the one thing I think most of our programs in a collaborative way need to do is something we've incorporated in ours, and it's adaptive management. We have an adaptive management when fine things don't work. We don't keep doing it anymore. We try something else. And so that's been very effective. We've had a thumbs down on several issues and quite honestly, discard that and move on to a different plan. So adaptive management, I think, is a new buzzword. And I do think it holds some opportunity for success and that you don't keep doing the same thing over and over.
You know, I guess in my whole adult life, I've probably been on collaborative efforts. I think that's kind of what I've been about. I think you have to have the conversations, and whether it's been brucellosis, sage-grouse, bighorn machine, I don't know how many of these I've sat in on a big part of it, but you have to be at the table, you have to develop relationships, and building relationships is the single most important thing that you can do to try to get a successful resolution to an issue.
Yeah, I use the same word trust. You know, once you have trust, you can do things. And in my life, I've been very fortunate. You know, when my partner's Fish and Wildlife guy comes to our valley, it doesn't always happen this way all over this country. But when it comes to our valley, people say, "Hey, Mark's in town. Let's do something." We've worked on both Upper Colorado endangered fish and sage grouse, and it has been a positive experience.
David, one last quick comment. One other example that I'm very proud of that barely touches but does touch endangered species is the Governor's Task Force on Forests. That collaborative group, and there's a bunch of them here in this room today that participated. Clearly, the success lies in the future and what goes on there. But that was a very long concerted effort, and I'm really proud of that effort that Cloudy Roof done.
Well, thank you, everybody. I will say we're only 2 minutes behind schedule for lunch, so I'd say that's a